When Martha Langley finally turned the key in the door of her new home, she couldn't help but pause for a moment. The metal key felt heavy in her hand, but not because of its weight. It was the meaning behind it. For the first time in her 48 years, the small single-story house in front of her belonged to her. The house wasn't anything fancy. The paint on the porch rails had peeled so much that the wood underneath showed through in long, pale streaks. The roof sagged just a little near the chimney, and the garden looked like it hadn't seen a proper trim in years. But to Martha, it was beautiful. It was hers. She stood there for a minute, breathing in the crisp afternoon air and taking in the quiet neighborhood. The street was lined with small homes just like hers, modest, lived in, full of stories. Across the road, an older man was mowing his lawn and a little boy chased a ball down the driveway. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safe. After years of renting small apartments and working double shifts, this tiny home was her victory. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The previous owners had already moved out, leaving behind bare walls and floors that creaked with every step. Martha smiled at the sound. Old bones, she murmured to herself. But still standing. Her daughter Lily followed behind, holding a cardboard box marked kitchen. At 15, Lily wasn't as excited as her mother. She looked around the room and frowned slightly. "It's small," she said, setting the box down with a thud. Martha nodded. "It is, but it's ours, sweetheart." They both stood in silence for a moment. The afternoon light slipped through the dusty window panes, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. Martha imagined what it would look like after they painted the walls and hung curtains, maybe a little rug near the couch, a plant in the corner. It would take time, but she could already picture it. A home full of warmth and laughter. Later that evening, as they unpacked boxes, Martha noticed something odd about the living room floor. Near the center of the room, right where the old rug lay, the boards dipped slightly. Not enough to worry her, but enough to feel it when she walked over it. She pressed down with her foot and felt a faint give beneath her weight. She muttered. "Might need to fix that." Lily glanced up from her phone. "What is it?" "Nothing serious," Martha said quickly. "Just an old floor. I'll get it looked at later." She didn't think much of it. The inspection report had already mentioned that the house had a few uneven boards and some old piping. For the price she'd paid, that was expected. Over the next few weeks, Martha settled into her new life. She woke early each morning to make coffee and listen to the sound of birds outside the window. She liked how quiet the neighborhood was. No sirens, no noisy upstairs neighbors, no landlord calling about late rent. Just peace. Work wasn't easy. She had 2 part-time jobs, one at a local grocery store and another cleaning offices in the evenings. But every time she drove home, she felt a small burst of pride. The chipped white fence and crooked mailbox were reminders of what she had achieved. Some nights after Lily went to bed, Martha would sit on the living room floor with a cup of tea and just look around. She loved how the light flickered against the old walls. Even with all its flaws, the house made her feel grounded, like life was finally starting to make sense again. But she couldn't ignore that uneven spot in the floor. Each time she walked across it, she felt the faint dip under her shoes. She had even tried lifting the rug one evening, just to see if a nail had popped loose, but everything looked normal, just old wood and dust. One Saturday, while rearranging furniture, Martha decided to clean that part of the floor properly. She pushed the couch aside, rolled up the rug, and knelt down with a cloth and a bucket of warm water. As she scrubbed, she noticed that one of the planks looked newer than the others. It was slightly lighter in color, as if someone had replaced it more recently. That caught her attention. The house was built in the 1950s, according to the papers. Why would only one board look new? She ran her hand over it, pressing gently. There it was again, the faint hollow sound. She laughed softly to herself. "Maybe there's treasure under there," she joked aloud, though she didn't really believe it. Lily walked in just then, munching on an apple. "Treasure?" she repeated, rolling her eyes. "Sure," Martha teased. "Maybe gold bars. Or a love letter from the past." "More likely termites," Lily said, and went back to her room. Martha smiled and shook her head. Still, her curiosity was piqued. She tapped the board again. A dull thud, but deeper this time, almost like there was a small space beneath it. She decided not to pry it open yet. The last thing she needed was to damage the floor and add another expense. That night, the sound of rain began to fall softly on the roof. Martha always loved the sound of rain, but that night it brought a different mood. Around midnight, she heard a strange dripping sound coming from the kitchen. When she went to check, she found a small puddle forming near the wall. Great, she sighed, grabbing a towel. It turned out that one of the old pipes had started leaking. She turned off the water valve and left a bucket underneath, deciding to call a plumber in the morning. But when she returned to the living room, she saw something new. A tiny crack had appeared near that same uneven spot on the floor. The wood looked slightly damp. The rain must have found its way in somehow. Martha crouched down, pressing the area gently. It felt soft. For a moment, she considered leaving it for the plumber, but something about it made her pause. She fetched a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and gently pried at the edge of the plank. It lifted more easily than she expected. Beneath it, she could see darkness, not dirt, not insulation, but an empty space. Her heart began to race. "That's strange," she whispered. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed what looked like a small square opening lined with concrete edges. She blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. It wasn't just a crack or damage, and no, it was a hidden compartment. Martha felt a mix of excitement and unease. She wasn't the type to jump to wild conclusions, but this wasn't something you found in a normal home. She shone the light deeper and saw what looked like a metal handle or latch, half buried in dust. She sat back, unsure of what to do next. Should she call someone? Or just close it back up and forget about it? It was late and she was tired. Maybe it was just part of an old heating system, she told herself. But when she lay down that night, sleep wouldn't come easily. Her mind kept returning to that metal handle beneath her floor. Why had no one mentioned it? Why would someone cover it up so neatly? The next morning, she told Lily about it over breakfast. "You're kidding," Lily said, eyes widening. "Like a trapdoor?" Martha shrugged. "Something like that. I didn't open it all the way. Probably nothing." Lily grinned. "Mom, you have to check." "What if it's like a bunker or something?" "Or just pipes," Martha replied. "Old houses have strange things hidden in them." Still, the thought stayed with her all day. That afternoon, after finishing her shift at the store, Martha stopped by the local library. She asked the librarian if they had any records about houses on Willow Street, her street. The woman brought out a few old files and property maps. As Martha flipped through them, something curious appeared. Her lot was listed as being built over repurposed land, meaning there had once been another structure there before the neighborhood was developed. That night, she looked again at the floor. The small hole she had made was still there, the board loosely covering it. She knelt down, hesitated, and then pressed her fingers against the edge of the opening. The air from below was cool and slightly musty. "Just take a quick look," she whispered to herself. When she lifted the board again and shone her flashlight, she saw it clearly this time in a square metal hatch with a handle, like a door leading downward. She froze. It didn't look like something for utilities. It looked deliberate. Her heart pounded as she reached out and brushed away a layer of dust. The handle moved slightly under her touch. She quickly pulled her hand back, startled by her own curiosity. She replaced the board and the rug on top, trying to calm herself down. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "I'll deal with it tomorrow." But even as she said it, she knew that whatever was beneath her inexpensive home wasn't something she could just ignore anymore. Something was hidden there, something that someone, long ago, had gone to great lengths to cover up. And though she didn't yet know it, that quiet little house would soon reveal a secret that would change her life forever. The next morning started quietly. The sun slipped through the thin curtains, lighting up the kitchen with a warm, sleepy glow. Martha stood by the counter, stirring sugar into her coffee, her mind still circling around the strange hatch under her living room floor. Lily came out in her school uniform, yawning, and dropped into a chair. "You didn't sleep much, huh?" she said, noticing the dark circles under her mother's eyes. Martha smiled weakly. "You could say that. You're still thinking about the thing under the floor, aren't you?" Martha tried to sound casual. "Maybe a little. I just don't understand why it's there." Lily took a sip of her juice. "You should open it. If it's something dangerous, we should know. If it's just junk, at least you can stop worrying." Martha looked at her daughter. The girl had a point. She didn't want to admit it, but curiosity had been eating at her all night. After dropping Lily at school, she came back home, locked the front door behind her, and stood in the middle of the living room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. She pulled the old rug aside again, revealing the slightly lifted board. "All right," she whispered to herself. "Let's see what you're hiding." She fetched her tools from the small storage closet, an old hammer, a flashlight, and a screwdriver. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the screwdriver under the board again. It came loose with a soft groan, releasing a small puff of dust into the air. She coughed lightly, waving it away, and then aimed the flashlight downward. The beam caught the same metal handle she'd seen before, this time more clearly. It was thick, coated in years of grime and rust. The hatch itself seemed to be built into a layer of concrete, like a sealed doorway leading down. She knelt down, touching the edge. It was cold and solid. She pulled on the handle. It didn't move at first. She gave it another tug, harder this time, and it shifted with a scraping sound. A faint, earthy smell drifted upward, mixed with something metallic. Her heart thumped faster. "Oh my," she whispered. She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. What if it was a storage pit? Or a storm shelter? Maybe even a crawl space someone forgot to mention? She tugged one more time and the hatch creaked open, revealing a square hole big enough for a person to climb through. A narrow concrete staircase disappeared into the dark below. For a few seconds, Martha simply stared, frozen. The air coming from below felt cooler, damp but not foul. She leaned closer and shone her flashlight down the steps. Dust and cobwebs lined the walls. "This must be some kind of old basement," she said aloud, as if the sound of her own voice could steady her nerves. She stood up and went to grab her phone. Maybe she should call someone, a neighbor or even the city inspector, just to be safe. But when she tried to explain it to herself out loud, it sounded silly. "Hi, I found stairs under my floor." What would they even say? Taking a deep breath, she decided to go just a few steps down to look. She held the flashlight in one hand and slowly placed her foot on the first step. It held firm. The concrete was rough under her shoes. She took another step, then another, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The light flickered over the walls. They were lined with stone and old wooden beams. A thin layer of dust covered everything, and spiderwebs hung like curtains. But the space was larger than she'd expected, more like a hidden room than a crawl space. At the bottom of the stairs, she found a flat floor made of cement. Her flashlight beam swept across the space. There were several boxes stacked against the wall, old and worn, their edges fraying. In one corner stood a small metal shelf with a few jars and tools. Martha's breath caught. What is this place? She crouched down near one of the boxes and brushed her hand across the top. It left a clean streak in the dust. With a little effort, she opened the first one. Inside were old newspapers folded neatly and yellowed with age. The print was faded, but she could still make out the date, 1962. The headline on the top paper read, "Local family vanishes without a trace." She blinked, reading it again. The article included a grainy black and white photo of a couple standing in front of a large house. The text was hard to read, but it mentioned something about an investigation that had gone cold. Her pulse quickened. Why would someone keep this here? She opened another box. This one held more newspapers, and beneath them, a few photographs wrapped in old envelopes. The pictures were faded, showing people dressed in clothes from another era. One photo showed a group of smiling faces in a garden, but what caught Martha's attention was one woman in the photo. She looked strangely familiar. The woman had the same light eyes, the same jawline. It was almost like looking at an older version of herself. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. No, that can't be. She set the photo aside and opened a smaller box on the shelf. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a small rusted metal key. Next to it lay a notebook, its cover brittle and brown. She picked it up carefully, wiping the dust from the first page. The handwriting inside was neat, almost formal. The first line read, "If anyone finds this, please take care to understand what happened here." Martha swallowed hard. Her hand shook as she turned the page. The entries seemed to belong to a woman, someone who had lived here long ago. The writer spoke about her family, about feeling trapped, and about keeping something important safe. Halfway through the notebook, the writing became hurried, desperate. One line stood out. "They can't know the truth about the child." I did what I had to do. Martha closed the notebook, her heart pounding. The air in the basement suddenly felt heavier, pressing against her chest. She glanced around again. The boxes, the photos, the old safe sitting half hidden beneath a wooden crate. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it caught her eye. It was small and square, covered in dust and cobwebs with a dial lock on the front. The same pattern she'd seen on the key in the box. She picked up the key, her fingers trembling, and knelt by the safe. The key slid in easily. She turned it gently, and to her surprise, it clicked open. Inside were more photographs, a few letters tied together with string, and a folded document. The letters were addressed to someone named Evelyn. The handwriting matched the notebook. She unfolded the document carefully. It was an old birth certificate, the paper yellowed and fragile. Her eyes ran across the details, and her breath caught when she reached the name written in the mother section. It was the same last name as hers. Her hands began to shake. "No way," she whispered. She read it again, her heart racing. The dates didn't match her birth year exactly, but they were close. The names were too similar to be coincidence. She felt dizzy. Could this be connected to her family somehow? Her mother had never spoken much about her early life. She had always said she was adopted, informally by relatives after her own parents had problems. But Martha had never questioned. It was just one of those family stories that got passed down without details. Now, standing in the dim light of a hidden basement, that vague story didn't feel so harmless anymore. She sat down on the bottom step, clutching the papers to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe this was just a strange coincidence. But the handwriting, the photos, that woman's face, it all felt too close. After a long pause, she placed everything back carefully into the box and carried it up the stairs. The afternoon light from the living room felt blinding after the gloom below. She pushed the hatch closed, set the floorboard back in place, and sat on the couch, her mind spinning. Lily came home from school not long after. "You look weird," she said, dropping her backpack. "What happened?" Martha hesitated. "I found something." "What kind of something?" Martha gestured toward the table, where the old newspaper and photos now lay. Lily picked one up, squinting at the faded faces. "Who are they?" "I don't know," Martha said softly. "But one of them looks a lot like me." Lily frowned. "You're kidding. I wish I was." They sat together for a long moment, neither of them speaking. The room felt heavier now, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Finally, Martha said, "I think I need to find out who these people were. Someone hid all this for a reason." Lily nodded slowly. "Do you think it has something to do with Grandma?" Martha's eyes flickered toward the floor. "Maybe, I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." As evening fell, Martha packed the notebook and the letters into a small box and placed it on her nightstand. She didn't know what kind of story she had stumbled into, but one thing was certain. Whatever was hidden beneath that floor had been waiting a long time to be found, and now that she had uncovered it, there was no turning back. The next morning, Martha woke up before sunrise. For a long while, she just lay there staring at the ceiling, her mind running in circles. The old photographs and letters she had found the day before still sat on her nightstand in a small box. Every time she looked at it, her stomach tightened. When she finally got up, the house was silent. Lily was still asleep, her door half open. Martha tiptoed past and went to the kitchen. As the coffee machine hummed softly, she sat at the table and opened the box again. She laid everything out neatly: the yellowed photographs, the notebook, the folded birth certificate. The woman in the photo who looked so much like her seemed to stare back with calm, sad eyes. There was something about her expression, a quiet strength mixed with worry. Martha picked up the birth certificate and read the names again. The mother's name, Evelyn Langley, her own last name. The father's name was left blank. The date was from the early 1960s. Her own mother, Helen, had never mentioned anyone named Evelyn. She used to say she'd grown up with relatives after her parents went away for work. But that story had always been vague. Now it didn't sound like the truth at all. After Lily left for school, Martha decided she couldn't just sit and wonder anymore. She packed the documents in her tote bag and drove to the small local records office downtown. The building was old and quiet, with the smell of paper and polished wood hanging in the air. At the front desk sat a kind woman with glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Good morning," Martha said softly. I was wondering if I could look up some family records from the 1960s. The woman smiled. Of course. Any specific names? Martha hesitated for a moment. Langley. Evelyn Langley. The woman typed something into her computer, then frowned slightly. That name does come up. Let me pull the file from the archives. Give me a few minutes. Martha nodded and took a seat on one of the wooden benches by the wall. Her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. She looked around the room at the dusty file cabinets, the slow-moving ceiling fan, the quiet hum of the printer. She felt like time itself had slowed down. When the clerk returned, she was holding a thin folder. Here we go. Not much, but you can take a look. Martha opened it carefully. Inside were a few typed documents, a property transfer, a birth record, and a missing person report. Her heart skipped as she read the first line. Filed June 10, 1962, Evelyn Langley reported missing. She read it twice to be sure. The report said Evelyn had last been seen at her family home, the very same address where Martha now lived. She felt a chill. The report also mentioned that Evelyn had a small child, age 1, whose whereabouts were unknown. Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. "Oh my God," she whispered. The clerk looked up. "Is everything all right?" Martha nodded quickly, forcing a small smile. "Yes, thank you." This was very helpful. She left the building in a daze. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, but she barely noticed it. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what she had just learned. Could she be that child? Was it even possible? When she got home, she pulled out her old photo albums. Most of her childhood pictures were from when she was already 4 or 5 years old. There were no baby photos, none at all. She had asked her mother about that once years ago, and Helen had just said their old photos were lost in a flood. Now, that answer didn't sound right anymore. That evening, she sat with Lily in the living room. The air was heavy between them. The old papers were spread across the coffee table. "So, you think she's part of our family?" Lily asked quietly. "I don't know," Martha said. "But the more I read, the more I think my mother wasn't telling me the whole truth." Lily frowned. "Why would she lie?" Martha sighed. "Sometimes people keep secrets to protect others. Or themselves." She looked at the picture again. "Maybe something bad happened back then. Maybe my mother was scared." Lily sat closer. "What are you going to do?" "I need to find out who Evelyn really was, and why she disappeared." The next day, Martha took the notebook to the library and asked if there were any old newspaper archives. The librarian led her to a computer with scanned microfilm images from the local papers. She typed in Evelyn Langley. Dozens of results appeared on most of them small mentions from the 1960s. She clicked through them one by one. One article caught her eye. It was dated a week after the missing person report. The headline read, "Mystery deepens in local disappearance." The story said Evelyn Langley had been living in a small home on the outskirts of town, the same one Martha had bought. The police found signs that someone had left in a hurry, but no struggle. A neighbor had told reporters that Evelyn was a quiet woman who rarely spoke about her past. She was seen often with a baby, but no one knew much about the father. One night, she and the child were simply gone. Martha felt her throat tighten. The house she lived in wasn't just any house. It was Evelyn's, the one she had vanished from. She printed the article and tucked it into her bag. As she was leaving the library, an older man sitting near the door glanced at the printout in her hand. "That name sounds familiar," he said. Martha turned. "Evelyn Langley?" He nodded slowly. "My parents used to talk about that case." It was a big mystery back then. Some folks said she ran away. Others thought something bad happened. But the truth? No one ever found out. "Do you know if she had any family?" Martha asked. "I think she did," he said. "An older sister, maybe? Moved out of state after all that happened. I don't remember her name, though." "It's been a long time." Martha thanked him and walked to her car, her mind racing again. An older sister. Could that have been her mother, Helen? When she got home, she dug through an old box of papers her mother had left behind after she passed away years ago. Most of it was ordinary. Bills, letters, receipts. But near the bottom she found a faded envelope with no return address. Inside was a single letter written in careful handwriting. It began with, "Dear Helen, if you ever read this, please understand why I had to leave." Martha's eyes filled with tears as she read the rest. The letter spoke about fear. about wanting to protect a child, about mistakes that couldn't be undone. Evelyn wrote that she couldn't stay, that someone had been looking for her, and that the child would be safer hidden. Martha covered her mouth, her heart pounding. The signature at the bottom read, "With love always, your sister, Evelyn." She sank back against the wall, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her mother hadn't been Evelyn. Her mother had been Helen, Evelyn's sister, which meant the missing baby could have been her. For a long time, she sat there in silence, the letter trembling in her hands. Pieces of her life began falling into place. The missing photos, the strange stories, her mother's distant moods. Later that evening, Lily came into the room.
"Mom, are you okay?"
Martha wiped her eyes and handed her the letter. "I think I know what happened," she said softly. "I think my mother wasn't my real mother. I think she was my aunt." Lily's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I don't have proof yet," Martha said, her voice shaking. "But everything I've found points that way." Lily sat beside her quietly, not knowing what to say. After a while, she took her mother's hand. "Whatever the truth is, we'll figure it out together." Martha managed a small smile. "You always know what to say." That night, she placed the letter back in its envelope and set it on the table beside the old notebook. She felt exhausted, but a strange sense of purpose had taken root inside her. The truth might hurt, but it also felt like something she was meant to uncover. Before going to bed, she went to the living room and looked at the spot on the floor where she had found everything. The house was silent again, the air cool and still. She whispered softly, as if to the walls themselves, "I'll find out what really happened to you, Evelyn." As she turned off the lights, she couldn't help but feel that the house had been waiting all these years. Not for anyone else, but for her. The next few days were a blur for Martha. Her mind was always racing, piecing together the bits of information she had uncovered. She spent her evenings reading through the old documents, the photos, and the letter from Evelyn, trying to connect the dots. But the more she learned, the more questions arose. She knew she needed proof, something solid that could confirm her suspicions. She couldn't just keep guessing at the truth, piecing together bits of a broken story. She decided to take a bold step. She would get a DNA test. It was the only way to know for sure if Evelyn had been her real mother's sister, and if she truly was the missing child. A part of her felt nervous about what the results might reveal, but another part was desperate for answers. Martha found a local clinic that offered private genetic testing. She scheduled an appointment, but as the day drew closer, she started having second thoughts. What if she was wrong? What if all this was just a misunderstanding? The idea of being connected to a missing person from so long ago felt overwhelming. But when she walked into the clinic that afternoon, the staff were kind and reassuring. The technician explained the process calmly and took her blood sample without much fuss. The whole experience felt like a blur, but when Martha left, the small vial of her blood felt like a symbol of everything she had been searching for, the key to unlocking her family's past. The next few weeks passed slowly. Martha tried to keep her focus on everyday life. Lily had her schoolwork, and Martha had her part-time job at the small diner in town. But every free moment, her mind was back on Evelyn and the strange, unsettling discoveries. She still hadn't told Lily everything, not yet. It was too much to explain all at once, but one evening, as they were sitting together watching TV, Lily turned to her. "Mom, do you think I'll ever get to meet my real grandmother?" Martha paused. She hadn't expected the question, and for a moment the air in the room felt heavy. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "You know, the one who was Evelyn. You said you think she was your mom's sister, right? And that your real grandmother's house is ours?" Lily's voice was full of curiosity. She didn't seem upset or worried, just genuinely interested. Martha nodded slowly, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She hadn't wanted to tell Lily too much yet, not until she was sure, but now it felt like time to start opening up. "Well, sweetie, I don't know if we'll ever meet Evelyn, or my real grandmother, but I'm trying to find out everything I can about our family. It's complicated, but we'll figure it out together, okay?" Lily smiled and nodded. "I know we will." Martha felt a rush of gratitude toward her daughter. Despite everything, Lily was handling it all so much better than she had expected. A week later, the results of the DNA test came in. The envelope was thick and official looking, and Martha's heart raced as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and her eyes immediately went to the section marked Genetic Match. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words. First-degree relative identified. The letter went on to explain the genetic connection to a woman named Helen Langley. It confirmed that Helen Langley had been her mother's sister. But the DNA also revealed something else, something even more unexpected. The test results confirmed that Martha was not just related to Evelyn. She was her daughter, the one who had been missing for decades. Martha stood frozen in place for a long time, the paper crumpling slightly in her hands. Her mind raced. How could this be possible? Everything she had thought she knew about her past, her family, had just been flipped upside down. She had been adopted, sure. But what if her mother wasn't the one who had raised her? What if she had been taken in as a child of Evelyn's? Was she the child from those old photographs, the baby who had disappeared all those years ago? She ran her fingers over the edges of the paper, feeling dizzy. All of this was starting to make sense in ways she couldn't explain. The house, the missing family members, the old photographs, everything was connected. But even as the truth slowly began to take shape, Martha felt more questions piling up in her mind. If she really was Evelyn's daughter, why had she been hidden away? Why hadn't her real family ever told her the truth? And most importantly, what happened to Evelyn? She had to know. Martha made a decision. She would go back to the town's archives and try to find more. She needed to know the rest of the story. The next morning, after Lily had left for school, Martha drove to the local courthouse. It wasn't far from the small diner where she worked, and she had spent many afternoons in the past browsing through old records. This time, though, she knew she was looking for something completely different. Inside, the clerk at the counter looked up when she entered. "Back again?" he said with a friendly smile. "What can I help you with this time?" "I need to look up the original missing person report for Evelyn Langley," Martha said, trying to keep her voice steady. The clerk raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, let me pull it up for you." It only took a few minutes. The man returned with a yellowed file and handed it to Martha. The first page was a photocopy of the original police report from 1962. It confirmed that Evelyn Langley had disappeared without a trace, along with her infant daughter. But as Martha read through the details, something stood out to her. The report mentioned a possible connection to a local family, with ties to organized crime, something Martha had never heard of before. The story seemed odd, out of place. Was this just a coincidence, or was it another piece of the puzzle she was starting to piece together? The report also mentioned that Evelyn's disappearance was linked to a fight over inheritance. The name of the person Evelyn had been involved with was blacked out, but it was clear that she had been running from someone. And it seemed that whoever had taken her had also taken her child, the same child who had been lost to history. Martha's fingers trembled as she read the words. She had to know more. But now the clock was ticking. Someone didn't want these secrets to come out. And if Evelyn had been hiding all these years, it was clear someone didn't want Martha to find her either. When she returned home, she sat down with the folder in her lap and looked over the documents again. There was still so much left unanswered. Why had her mother hidden the truth about Evelyn? Why had she kept it all buried for so long? Martha sat there, turning the papers over in her hands when Lily walked in after school. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the open file. "Mom, what's all that?" Martha looked up slowly. It's a lot to explain, sweetheart." Lily's brow furrowed. "But you said we'd figure it out." Martha nodded. "I know, and we will. It's just, I don't have all the answers yet. But I will. We're getting closer." Lily came over and sat beside her, placing a hand on her mother's arm. "I believe you," she said simply. Martha smiled, but inside a heavy weight pressed down on her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. She would uncover the full truth. She had to. For herself, for Evelyn, and for the family she had never known. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had come this far, and she wouldn't stop now. Martha's heart raced as she stared at the stack of documents in front of her. Each page felt like a small piece of a puzzle she was determined to complete. The deeper she dug into the past, the more tangled the story became. But she couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. Over the past few days, she had learned so much about Evelyn's life and the dark web of secrets surrounding her disappearance. Her mother's involvement, the strange disappearance of her aunt, and the cryptic clues left behind were all leading Martha to one conclusion. There was something much bigger at play than just a family tragedy. It was clear now. Evelyn hadn't disappeared by choice. She had been silenced, her life erased to protect someone's secrets. The more Martha read, the more she began to understand the connections. There were mentions of a distant relative, a powerful figure from her mother's side of the family, whose name kept cropping up in the police reports. His name had been redacted in all the documents, but Martha was starting to see the pattern. It wasn't just about Evelyn. It was about control, power, money. Martha sat back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Her hands trembled as she shuffled the papers together, trying to make sense of it all. The letter from Evelyn, the missing person report, the police investigations. It was all leading her down the same path. The only way to get the answers she needed now was to confront the people who had kept these secrets for so long. She decided to visit her mother's old house. Helen's home had always been a place of comfort, a place where she had lived for most of her life. But now it felt like the last place where the truth could be hiding. Maybe, just maybe, there were more clues hidden there, buried in the place where it all started. The house had changed little since her childhood. The walls still held the same wallpaper, faded and peeling in places. The old rocking chair in the corner of the living room still creaked when you sat in it. Martha walked through the room slowly, touching the familiar furniture, but everything felt different now. She wasn't the same person who had lived here all those years ago. As she wandered through the house, she came across an old cupboard, one she remembered her mother using to store linens and old knickknacks. Martha had never paid much attention to it before, but now, with everything she had uncovered, she felt compelled to open it. The cupboard was cramped and full of old items. Boxes of decorations, forgotten dishes, and some family heirlooms. But as Martha moved things around, she found a small leather-bound book. It was tucked deep in the back, hidden under a pile of unused towels. She pulled it out carefully, her pulse quickening. The book was a journal. Martha opened it cautiously. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, many of them difficult to read due to the age of the paper. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling as she read. Most of the journal entries seemed normal, random thoughts, brief moments from daily life, even a few recipes. But then she came to an entry that stopped her cold. I had to make a choice. The baby had to be hidden. If they found out, everything would be ruined. I don't know what I've done, but I can't go back now. Martha read the entry over and over. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her mother had written this. It was clear now. Helen had known the truth all along. But why had she hidden it? Why had she kept Evelyn's story a secret? She felt a wave of nausea hit her. The answers were here, right in front of her. But they raised even more questions. What kind of life had her mother lived? And what kind of threats had she been facing to protect her family from the truth? Martha could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. Her head spun with everything she had learned. The missing pieces, the cryptic journal entries, the mysterious figures from her family's past. It was becoming clear that Evelyn had been a victim of something far greater than anyone had ever imagined. That evening, Martha sat down with Lily. She had been avoiding the conversation, not wanting to overwhelm her daughter, but it was time. Lily sat across from her, looking concerned. "Mom, what's wrong?" "You've been so quiet these past few days." Martha took a deep breath. She needed to explain everything. She couldn't keep this secret from Lily any longer. "I've found more answers, Lily," she said softly. "And I've learned that our family, it's complicated. But I need you to understand something important. Everything I've discovered has led me to the truth about your grandmother, about Evelyn, and about my mother, too." Lily's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She just waited, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Martha continued. "Evelyn wasn't just my aunt. She was my mother. She disappeared when I was just a baby. She was hiding, running from something or someone. And for years I've been living in the house she left behind, thinking I was just another part of this family, when in reality, everything I knew was a lie." Lily didn't speak for a moment, letting the weight of her mother's words sink in. Finally she spoke, her voice small but firm. "So that we're not really who we thought we were?" Martha nodded. "No, sweetheart, we're not." Lily seemed to process this in silence, and Martha could see the confusion in her eyes. But then Lily looked up at her, a mix of emotions crossing her face. I don't really understand all of it, Mom, but I believe you. And I know you're trying to figure this out. We'll do it together, okay? Martha felt a rush of relief. She had feared this moment, but Lily's calm response gave her the strength she needed. Thank you, she whispered, pulling her daughter into a hug. They sat like that for a while, neither of them speaking, just holding each other. The silence between them felt heavier than it ever had before, but it was also filled with something else, a sense of determination. The next day, Martha visited the local records office once again. She had one last lead to follow up on. This time she was looking for any documents related to the inheritance fight mentioned in the old police report. She spoke with the same clerk who had helped her earlier. He seemed surprised to see her back again so soon, but offered to pull the records for her. After a short wait, he returned with a file thick with old legal papers. Martha skimmed through them quickly. They contained information about a contested inheritance, but more importantly, they identified the name of the person Evelyn had been fighting against. The name sent a chill down Martha's spine. It was someone she had heard of, a distant relative of her mother's, a wealthy man who had lived just a few towns over. His name had never been mentioned in her family before, but now everything was starting to fall into place. This man had been the one who had been after the inheritance, the one who had threatened to expose Evelyn's secrets, the one who had forced her into hiding. Martha left the records office feeling more determined than ever. She now knew who had been behind it all, and while the answers she had found were difficult to swallow, they gave her a sense of closure. Later that night, as Martha sat in the living room, she looked around at the house that had been the center of so many years of confusion. It no longer felt like the home she had once known. Now it felt like the final chapter of a story she was just beginning to understand. Lily joined her, sitting down beside her mother. What happens now? She asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Martha smiled, her heart heavy but full of purpose. Now we keep moving forward. We honor the past, but we live for the future. And as they sat there together, Martha realized that, no matter how hard it had been to uncover the truth, it had been worth it, because now at last she was free. Free from the shadows of the past, free to finally live her life, knowing who she was and where she came from. It had taken years to find the truth, but in the end, the truth had found her, and that was all that mattered.